Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into purchase orders, specifically how the price actually gets set in SAP. We'll use ME21N as our main example.
Right. And it's important to clear up a common idea. The price doesn't just sort of magically appear.
Exactly. It's not like the system invents it on the spot. There's a defined search process happening.
It's actively looking for prices, discounts, surcharges that have already been set up, in places like info records, contracts, or outline agreements.
Think of it like a price library it consults first.
That's a good way to put it. So this whole process is fundamentally about finding those existing conditions.
Which means if you manually slap a new condition onto the PO line,
Yes, a specific surcharge not in the systems library.
the system isn't necessarily going to automatically recalculate some complex total price using that new line unless the logic for that calculation is already defined somewhere.
Precisely. It finds what's pre-agreed. Now, a really critical part of how it finds the right price is the date it uses.
Ah, yes, the date. It's not always just today's date, is it?
No, definitely not. There's a clear hierarchy, a priority order for which date governs the price search.
Okay, so what's top priority?
Well, highest priority is actually a setting within the purchase order item itself. On the Conditions tab, there's a price date type.
But there's a catch there, right?
Yes, it really only comes into play if you manually change the date in the purchase order for that item and then actively trigger a new price determination, like hitting update.
Got it. So it's an override you have to deliberately use. If you don't touch that, what's next in line?
Then the system looks at the purchasing info record, transaction ME12 for that specific material and vendor combination.
And that setting overrides the more general vendor settings.
Exactly. The info record's price date type takes precedence over what's set in the main vendor master record. It gives you finer control for specific items.
Makes sense. Specific beats general. So the vendor master, MK02, that's the baseline.
That's the baseline, yes. The price date type set there in the vendor master applies by default to all materials from that supplier.
Unless an info record says otherwise. Or you do that manual PO item override we mentioned.
Correct. So let's take an example. Say the info record specifies using the goods received date type 5 for pricing.
Okay.
And imagine there are two different price validity periods set up. Maybe Feb to April has one price and May to December has another.
Correct.
If your PO delivery date is, say, May 17th.
Then naturally it'll pull the conditions valid from May 1st onwards.
Exactly. But what if, for some specific reason, you needed the earlier price, the one from the Feb-April period?
Then you'd have to go into that specific PO items conditions tab, change the price determination date or type, and essentially force the system to look again using that earlier time frame.
That's it. You manually redirected search.
Okay, clear. But what if the system goes through this whole hierarchy, PO item, info record, vendor master, and finds nothing? No standard conditions apply for the date it's using.
Ah, good question. There's a kind of safety net. If it's configured, the system can be set to look at the last purchase order placed for that same material and vendor combination.
So it can, remember the conditions used last time?
Pretty much. It pulls those conditions from the previous PO. This isn't automatic everywhere, though. It needs to be enabled.
Where do you set that up?
That's configured in SAP Customizing. The path is SPRO, then Materials Management, Purchasing, Environment Data, and finally, define default values for buyers.
Okay, so it's a deliberate configuration choice whether to use that fallback.
Yes. And the same kind of fallback logic can apply if your info record points to something like a scheduling agreement that has conditions without a specific end date.
If no other standard conditions fit, it might adopt those from the scheduling agreement.
Correct. It's another way to ensure some conditions are found if the standard date-based search fails.
Now here's a slightly tricky scenario. Let's say the system did use that fallback. It pulled conditions from the last PO.
Okay.
Then later, someone goes into the PO and uses the update function, specifically option B, carry out new pricing.
Right, to refresh the prices.
Does it pull those last PO conditions in again?
Actually, no. That's an important distinction. When you trigger a new pricing determination with update B, it will only search for currently valid standard conditions based on the date hierarchy we discussed.
So it won't reapply conditions it previously borrowed from an old document.
Exactly. Those borrowed conditions aren't considered standard for the purpose of that new pricing function.
That's really crucial to understand. New pricing doesn't just mean repeating the last successful pricing, especially if it involved a fallback.
Absolutely. It really highlights why knowing this search logic, the date priorities, The potential fallbacks is so vital for accurate procurement and understanding your PO values.
So wrapping up, the key takeaway is PO pricing in SAP isn't magic, it's a structured search. It hunts for existing, predefined conditions based on a clear date hierarchy.
And it has that potential fallback, that memory of the last order's conditions,
Yeah.
if you've configured it that way.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? For the different buying scenarios you encounter, what are the real-world effects, maybe cost implications or timing issues of using, say, the delivery date versus the GR date versus the order date for price determination? Something to consider. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into purchase orders, specifically how the price actually gets set in SAP. We'll use ME21N as our main example.
Right. And it's important to clear up a common idea. The price doesn't just sort of magically appear.
Exactly. It's not like the system invents it on the spot. There's a defined search process happening.
It's actively looking for prices, discounts, surcharges that have already been set up, in places like info records, contracts, or outline agreements.
Think of it like a price library it consults first.
That's a good way to put it. So this whole process is fundamentally about finding those existing conditions.
Which means if you manually slap a new condition onto the PO line,
Yes, a specific surcharge not in the systems library.
the system isn't necessarily going to automatically recalculate some complex total price using that new line unless the logic for that calculation is